Okay, I'll cut right to the chase. This is going to be an immensely difficult episode to discuss, because the vast majority of my opinions depend solely on the content of future episodes. In turn, I won't be treating this video as a traditional episode breakdown. Rather than break down every single event that occurs in its runtime, I'll be approaching this episode as a whole and its accompanying implications more thematically. To put it simply, if the Night King actually survived somehow, this episode was incredible. However, if the Night King is actually dead, the entire show is ruined. This statement may seem harsh, but I'm not going to simply leave it at that. This will serve as the thesis point to this breakdown. I'll circle back to it as I make my way through. So cover your ears, kids. Grandpa's in a mean way tonight. Another entirely separate element of this episode that creates analytical difficulty is the lack of individual scenes to break down. Rather, in a masterful conveyance of realism, the episode mostly plays out as one continuous chain of uncut cause and effect. From the opening crawling shot framed around Sam's pre-battle nerves, we feel the reality of what's happening sinking in. For the most part, the episode forgoes the traditional epic fantasy battle in favor of a grounded nightmare of sorts. You can feel the fear, the bitter cold, the confusion and chaos of the accompanying blizzard. I felt like I was there, numb at the edge of my seat, occasionally shooting up and pacing around the room when tension rose. The battle running in this episode is unprecedented in fantasy filmmaking. As a fiction writer myself, battles have always been a major struggle for me. It's achingly difficult to convey the chaotic realism of war, especially in non-traditional conflicts like a fight against the army of the dead. Yet somehow, the show's writers and cinematographers managed to work together to make one of the most realistic portrayals of battle ever put to film. For that, I give this episode a ton of credit. But unfortunately, that's where my credit comes to a screeching halt. The lack of consequential deaths in this episode removes so much of the weight that this masterful realism held. In the same show as The Red Wedding, we get nearly no primary character deaths in a battle against a near unbeatable force. We did lose Theon, whose death was handled absolutely masterfully, perfectly concluding his character arc. The man who took Winterfell from the Starks poetically died protecting them. We also, of course, lost Jorah, whose death didn't really do much for me emotionally. Regardless, we knew both of their deaths in this battle were practically an inevitability. There were no losses that truly shook us to the core, giving us Ned Stark beheading or Mountain Oberyn vibes. All men must die, but not if they have plot armor, I guess. Before I get to what should inevitably take up the meat of this breakdown, I'd like to discuss Melisandre. I've gone from hating how she was handled in this episode to absolutely loving it, to an overall neutrality. And if a neutral reaction is all that the showrunners can get out of me for the arc climax of one of the best characters in the entire series, you know something's not right here. When she left Dragonstone for Volantis, home to the largest temple of her faith last season, I had nothing but glowing optimism and excitement. All of the possibilities that could have arisen from her off-screen journey, the rallying of the Red Priesthood militant, the ability to create fire wights, in other words, to raise the dead with fire magic to counteract the Night King, the gathering of pivotal information on the Azor Ahai prophecy. The show writers had an incredible opportunity on their hands and they just had her learn a fire spell. It may seem useful on the surface, but think about it. Melisandre knew there would be dragons on their side, dragons who could produce mountains of fire at a moment's notice. We have the benefit of having seen the episode, so we know of the magical blizzard that prevented Dany and Jon from fully utilizing the reptilian resources, but Melisandre didn't. This reeked of writing convenience as opposed to the smooth naturality that Game of Thrones is famous for. Her episode concluding death, however, I've warmed up to. She dedicated her entire life to a religion whose dogma centers around defeating the White Walkers. With the White Walkers gone and the death sentence awaiting her, it made perfect sense for her to release herself from the magical burden keeping her alive, beautiful, and powerful to simply walk off into freedom. A fitting end for Melisandre that would have actually been effective if the writers had used her effectively. Okay, here we go. The big rant. Book 1 and Season 1 both begin with the same prologue, an encounter with the White Walkers. This brisk but effective sequence is immediately juxtaposed by the majority of the book and season respectively being primarily politically focused. This bait and switch is so effective because it immediately clues us into the core themes of the series. While politicians squabble in their Game of Thrones, we know the real threat is off in the distance, growing. This thematic palpability is maintained as the show progresses. Cryptic messages from characters like Melisandre and Quaithe, ominous sightings and encounters by Jon and the Night's Watch beyond the wall, Bran's journey to find the Three-Eyed Raven, Daenerys' visions in House of the Undying. All of these are perfectly set as the background to the primary narratives, the War of the Five Kings and Daenerys' growth of her forces in the East. As the series progresses beyond these frontal conflicts, the size and proximity of the mythical threat only grows, consuming more and more of the plot until it becomes omnipresent in latest seasons. Characters focusing so strongly on political maneuvering and claiming birthrights caused them to fail to see the bigger picture until it was on their doorstep. This is the story of of Game of Thrones, the playing of the game to distract from a greater threat until it is simply too late. If you don't believe me, believe George R. R. Martin. George has always said A Song of Ice and Fire is an anti-war story. Only by putting aside selfishness and difference and banding together can humanity tackle the greater threat to our species. It is for this reason that many people see the series as an allegory for climate change. Focusing on political and economic interests has steered the world away from resolving an issue that only grows and grows over time. With this core theme in mind, you're telling me that they defeat the Night King, the looming threat behind it all, only to go off and deal with more political games? Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose? Okay, maybe it isn't so bad. After all, in the Lord of the Rings novels, the hobbits still had to fight a pathetic, washed-up Saruman after defeating Sauron in the Army of Evil. But in Game of Thrones, they haven't yet addressed seasons of setup, seasons of foreshadowing, seasons of plot. What of the Azor High Prince who was promised prophecy? What of Daenerys' House of the Undying visions in which, might I remind you, she sees a frozen King's Landing throne room? What of Bran's entire journey up until this point? What of the Weirwood Network? What of the reasoning and motivation behind the Night King and the rest of the White Walkers? Why'd they return now, of all times? What about the Night King's abilities, ones that have been shown to match and sometimes surpass those of the Three-Eyed Raven? What about the core themes and morals of the entire story? This is why I say that if the Night King is truly dead and the threat he poses is resolved out of the series, then quite frankly, the show is ruined. They would have spent seasons adapting the foreshadowing and build-up that George wrote, and then even more seasons continuing this pattern, only to throw it away because wouldn't it be cool if Arya just came out of nowhere and killed the Night King? But what if it isn't ruined? What if years of build-up and theming weren't in vain? What if the Night King isn't truly defeated? The Night King may have shattered, and with him the remaining White Walkers and the greater army of the dead, but why is Arya capable of jumping out of nowhere and killing him when he's been shown time and time again to have future sight abilities? The Night King's mission has seemingly been to wipe the Three-Eyed Raven consciousness out of existence. His moment is finally here, his chance to kill the Three-Eyed Raven who hasn't found a successor. He's nearly won, Winterfell is nearly conquered. He finally approaches Bran, the object of his life's mission, but rather than go for the killing blow, he pauses. The two have an eerily long stare down, too long to simply be an acknowledgement. The two are clearly communicating, but not with words. What appears as unexplained stillness externally might be a raging mental battle internally. It's the final duel between good and evil that we just don't get to see. What if the reason the Night King dies, allowing him to lose his entire army, is because he's already won? What if he's preserved his consciousness and no longer needs his physical form, a simple visual manifestation that humans can understand? What if he's taken over the Weirwood Network? There was a Weirwood tree right there after all. Or, even worse, what if he's made his home inside Bran? Time and time again, we've been shown that the Night King carries the same abilities as Bran, but more potent, powerful, and well-trained. Why would we be shown evidence of this if not for a reason? As a warg, which might I remind you is a hereditary Stark trait not exclusive to the Three-Eyed Raven or other Green Seers, Bran has the ability to take control of the minds of other living things in times of need. We saw this case in point with the Hodor paradox back in Season 6. Why were we shown this ability and its consequences if not for a reason? If popular theoretical discourse is correct, and the Night King was an early, if not the first, Stark, then wouldn't it make sense that he would be able to warg? Wouldn't it make sense that the Night King has made his new home inside the mind of Bran or inside the greater Weirwood Collective? This circles me back to the main thesis of this breakdown. If my theoretical train of thought is proven to be correct in some capacity, then this was an incredible trick by the writers. Give viewers fan service to trick us into satiation, only to have the rug pulled right out from under us, sending us crashing to the ground. That would be the ultimate Game of Thrones move. The perfect culmination of the precedent the show has built for 8 seasons. If, however, what we saw was what we got, and this is the genuine end of the White Walkers' role in the plot, then everything the series has worked for has been thrown away. The show would be ruined. But I want to know what you think. Do you think I'm just some crazy book nerd with too high of expectations? Do you think my theory or some variation of it will prove to be true within the remaining few episodes we have left? Do you think the show is perfect even if it doesn't come to fruition? Let me know your thoughts or any questions you may have down in the comments below. If you like this video and like to see more Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire content of this nature, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. For Game of Thrones news, discussion, and memes, follow me over on Twitter at ProfOfThrones. For updates on my fiction writing and gonzo journalism, visit www.joshuaclafter.com. No need for memorization. All links are in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and remember, the Professor of Thrones is here to teach you.